Up to this time the ancient names of the division of the lands of the earth, which were Waga, Jud, Dis, Vohu, and Thauri, had been maintained, and the first cycle's final, God and his lords, having been driven from the place of Horde, which had gone into dissolution, dwell part of the time in Waga, Pan, and part in Jud, Asia, and Vohu, Africa. Accordingly, the first cycle's final, God and the lords of such, had established 3 kingdoms, one in Waga, Pan, one in Jud, Asia, and one in Vohu, Africa. And within these kingdoms of heaven, there were 200 million redeemed angels capable of the second resurrection, and 100 million Essenes and unlearned apprentices. Waga was chief of the 3 heavens, and their god, lords and all chief officers had congregated as soon as the sign of the descending sea of Jehovah's kingdom appeared in the firmament above. Jehovah spoke to the first cycle's final, God, saying, "Make your places ready, O my son, and your lords with you. Behold, I come in a world of fire, and my faithful workers shall find rest and happiness. Ashong will redeem your sons and daughters, for he will girdle the earth with new Etherian light and great power. Call your people together, O final God of the first cycle, and have them rejoice and make merry, for the time of deliverance is at hand." Then, the first cycle's final, God communicated to the lords, and they again to others, the words of Jehovah, and at seeing the sign in heaven, the faithful began to rejoice and gather together in their respective places. But of the unbelieving angels dwelling on earth, with mortals and in other abodes, in other locales, of whom there were hundreds of millions, this is what happened. They, the unbelieving angels, were overcome by the sight of the ship of fire in heaven above, and fled, in fear, in all directions. And by their great numbers in the presence of mortals, caused mortals to also fear and flee in search of some secure place. And many of these spirits of darkness came beseechingly, begging, to be admitted into the kingdoms of the lords, where they had been invited for hundreds of years but would not come. But the first cycle's final, God and the lords of such, surrounded their places with walls of light, and would not receive the unbelieving. God said, "Until Ashong arrives, let order be maintained within my kingdoms." But outside, the fear that prevailed for 6 days and nights on earth and in heaven, was greater than any time since the earth first was. Meanwhile, the first cycle's final, God and the lords of such, brought their Essenors out, and they sang and danced before Jehovah. And on the approach of Ashong with his hosts, God's musicians, heralds, and the great multitude arrayed in shining raiment, were all overcome by the splendor and magnificence, as were even God and his lords. These latter, the first cycle's final God and lords, sat down on the improvised throne. The Etherian marshals approached and divided their ranks, first into single columns, then double, then quadruple, and so on till the 50,000 marshals had enclosed all sides, except the east, where there was an open space through which Ashong came, attended by his chief counselors, of whom there were 5,000. After them came the council of 1,000,000, interspersed here and there with groups of thousands of Essenors, who were chanting hymns of praise to Jehovah and his kingdoms. Above the continent of Waga, Pan, and parts of Jud, Asia, and Vohu, Africa, the lower heaven was illuminated by the hosts of Ashong, the like of which had never been in Atmospheria before. Nor was there any work being done on earth or in heaven, because of the fear and great stirring up. But now Ashong approached before the throne of the first cycle's final, God and the lords of such, saluting with the sign of the second degree of Jehovah, saying, "In Jehovah's name, and by his power, wisdom, and love, I have come to give you joy." The first cycle's final, God said, "In Jehovah's name, all hail. Ashong, chief of Inacharan, all hail." And God went forward to the foot of the throne and received Ashong, at which the lords came forward saluting also. The Essenors ceased singing, and Oahspe proceeded to the throne and sat on it. And God took off his own crown, and gave it to Oahspe, and also gave him the triangle, which was called the heirloom of the heavenly kingdoms of earth, bestowed by command of Yeshuah. The all-light was abundant around Oahspe, and out of the light, the voice of Yeshuah spoke, saying, Because these things are done in my name prayerfully, and in faith, so do I, Yeshuah, dwell with you all. My son, Oahspe, shall wear your crown, O final God of the first cycle. Behold, I, Yeshuah, come in might and swiftness, for it is the springtime of the earth. My son, Cephas, whose established and enforced culture personified, is afoot on the earth. He has stirred up the earth born. But I will establish my light anew in these heavens. Have I, Yeshuah, not said, I brought the seed of everlasting life to the earth? I gave responsibility to God and his lords, to teach mortals and spirits of my glories in the upper heavens. And I commanded, that my God and my lords in these realms, would be from those who came up out of the earth. You, O final God of the first cycle, were installed by my hand, and have done a good work. Do not think that I, Yeshuah, curse because Hord and Moab are fallen. Did I not know beforehand, that these things would be? Behold, I have provided all my works, so that man would be forever making new things. If Hord had remained standing, there would have been no heaven, to rebuild on earth in this day. How, then, could my newborn gods learn? Do not think, that I come to teach with my own labor. I provide my people, so that they shall teach one another. What is so conceited as man? And yet I, Yeshuah, bring him into life the dumbest of animals. Man prides himself in his power and wisdom. I send the drought, the rains and winds, the weakest of my members, and they show man he is nothing. So also do my gods and lords of the lower heaven, become conceited in their power and wisdom, but with the turn of a word, their heavens fall. Billions of souls turn from order and high estate, into confusion and anarchy. Thus I confound men and angels, and in their seeming misery laid the foundation for an everlasting good. The voice ceased. Oahspe said, In the name of Yeshuah, I announce my presence over earth and the lower heaven. The Marshals said, All hail. Oahspe, God of heaven and earth. Proclaim him in Yeshuah's name. Hardly had these words gone forth, when the voice of the entire hosts joined in proclaiming, All hail, O God, Son of Yeshuah. Oahspe, now God, of heaven and earth, said, O final God of the first cycle, your crown shall be my crown, for under it, Yeshuah's power shall triumph. Otherwise people would say, Behold, there is no virtue in Yeshuah's crowns. So he, Oahspe, placed it, the crown, on his head, rose up, and saluted the retired God and lords, saying to them, I, Oahspe, have a place for you, O retired God and lords, and it is called Yeshuah, or salvation. Retire there with my proper officers, and partake of rest and the freedom of the place until I come also. But the retired God and lords said, Put us to labor, we pray. To which, God, Oahspe, said, Yeshuah's sons must not be humiliated. How, then, can you labor under me, in what would essentially be a demotion? Were you not Yeshuah's God and lords? They, the retired God and lords, perceived, and, after due salutations, were provided with an escort of 500,000 men and women, and they departed on their way to Yeshuah. God, Oahspe, said, Let Mgi, Bingfo and Nes come before me. They shall be my lords of dawn in Yeshuah's name. The three, Mgi, Bingfo, and Nes, came and stood before the throne. God, Oahspe, said, I announce the presence of Yeshuah's lords of the earth. The Marshals said, All hail. O Mgi, Bingfo and Nes, Yeshuah's lords of earth. These, three, were also proclaimed by the united voice of the assembled hosts. God, Oahspe, said, In Yeshuah's name, go your ways, O lords of earth. At that, the lords, Gi, Bingfo, and Nest, crowned themselves and departed at once, saluting reverently. God, Oshung, said, "Bring the atmospherian marshals before me." They were brought and stationed in front of the throne. God said, "Glory to you, O Yeshuah. For I look upon your sons and daughters who have withstood a great darkness, but retained faith in you. In your name, and by virtue of your power, I deliver them now. Let him who is chief answer me, how many angels are prepared for the second resurrection?" Sani, chief marshal, said, 200 million. God, Oshung, said, "Retire, you and your companions, and assemble Yeshuah's harvest of souls, and I will send them to Yeshuah." The atmospherians were then duly arranged as commanded, and God, Oshung, called 100 swift messengers and 1,000 Etherian marshals, and they provided an abatos, a type of spirit ship, and the hosts who had been prepared for the second resurrection departed for Yeshuah, as commanded. God, Oshung, said, "I now have remaining my Etherian hosts and the atmospherians in darkness. Of the latter, let them remain as they are for 3 days, for I will travel around the world with my Etherian hosts, observing mortals and spirits in their places and habits, so that I may better judge them and provide accordingly." So God, Oshung, and his Etherian angels provided an abatos, and they embarked and started on their journey, traveling imperceptibly to mortals.